Imagine a threat actor silently slipping past every authentication protocol on your network to gain full root access to your core devices. Once inside, threat actors weaponize this access to deploy Mirai botnet malware directly into your infrastructure. This is the reality of CVE-2026-34908, a critical vulnerability carrying a maximum CVSS base score of 10.0. That perfect 10 means the attack vector is network-based, the complexity is low, and it requires 0 prior privileges or user interaction to execute. Think of it as a hidden backdoor to your building's control panel. The attacker ignores the front desk entirely and walks straight into the server room. From there, they immediately begin making authorized system changes, starting with the creation of rogue administrator accounts. This grants them full device takeover and potential access to sensitive customer data routing through the hardware. The total technical impact here is absolute infrastructure compromise, achieved without a single internal employee clicking a phishing link or misconfiguring a firewall. The life cycle of this threat began on May 21, 2026, with an initial data submission to HackerOne. By June 9th, security analysts observed threat actors actively weaponizing the flaw in the wild. Recognizing the severe risk to enterprise infrastructure, CISA officially added the flaw to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog on June 23rd. Under the BOD 26-04 directive, federal civilian agencies were given a strict, legally binding deadline to remediate the threat, June 26, 2026. We need to pause this technical briefing to initiate a mandatory comms check. To ensure you receive actionable, real-time threat intelligence like this as soon as it breaks, subscribe to @cybertech79 and enable notifications. Please leave a like on this video as a formal digital acknowledgement that this security intel has been received. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure is the only reliable mechanism we have to force vendor patches and protect the network perimeter against active weaponization. To understand your exposure, we need to examine the specific hardware configurations and platform enumerations at risk. The primary targets are network gateways, specifically UniFi OS servers, and the Dream machine lineup, including the Pro, SE, and Pro Max. The blast radius also extends to video and storage infrastructure, compromising enterprise fortress gateways, UniFi network video recorders, and UNAS devices. These systems all share a common architecture, the UniFi OS auth gateway. UniFi OS relies on an Nginx reverse proxy to enforce authentication by routing internal subrequests before granting access to the backend. The fatal configuration flaw lies in how Nginx reads these requests. It treats any request whose raw URI begins with the exact text string /API/auth/validate-sso as completely public. A rigid, perfectly secure backend authorization model is rendered completely useless if the front-end proxy contains a blind spot for a specific string of text. This vulnerability exploits a process called URI normalization, where a proxy cleans up and decodes a web request before sending it to the backend server. As we see in this diagram, the attacker crafts an initial payload using a mix of that specific public path and encoded characters. Nginx evaluates the raw URI against its rules. Seeing the trusted prefix, it assumes the request is safe and stamps it public. Nginx then prepares the payload for the backend. It percent-decodes the string, converting characters like %2f into a standard /. Next, it collapses directory traversals, executing the // commands to navigate up the folder tree. The request directly strikes an internal authenticated package update endpoint, unauthenticated. This foothold directly enables the second vulnerability in the chain, CVE-2026-34910. That specific internal endpoint suffers from improper input validation, allowing an attacker to pass raw commands into the system. By combining the Nginx auth bypass with this internal command injection, the threat actor achieves an unauthenticated remote code execution chain. This is the paradox of URI normalization. The security proxy successfully routes a destructive payload because it applies its security rules before determining the payload's actual final destination. To help network administrators identify their risk, security research firm Bishop Fox developed an open-source detection script to check UniFi OS server versions 5.0.6 and below. When dealing with live environments, SecOps teams must scan for exposure without executing malicious commands or accidentally altering the target state. The Bishop-Fox probe solves this problem by utilizing a simple plain GET request that intentionally fails to execute. This terminal simulation shows the script's logic in action. The request is sent without a required parameter known as pkg_name. The server responds with an HTTP 400 error stating that the parameter is missing. If the scanner returns a vulnerable verdict, the backend returned that specific missing parameter error, proving the bypass successfully reached the vulnerable internal sink. A patched verdict means Nginx caught the discrepancy and explicitly rejected the normalized path divergence before it reached the backend. An inconclusive verdict occurs when a confirmed UniFi OS host simply enforces authentication on the bypass attempt, often due to an intervening proxy blocking the path. Precision network probing allows enterprise teams to map their exact exposure radius mathematically, eliminating guesswork before deploying emergency patches. Eliminating this vulnerability across the ecosystem requires applying mandatory firmware upgrades. UniFi OS servers must be updated to version 5.0.8 or later, while hardware gateways require version 5.1.12 or later. This flowchart illustrates the mechanical fix. Ubiquiti modified Nginx to perform a direct comparison check between the raw URI and the normalized URI. If they mismatch, the proxy rejects the connection. For administrators who cannot immediately apply the patch, an emergency fallback mitigation is required. You must immediately block all untrusted network access to any internet-reachable device management interfaces. Applying the patch is only the first step. You must also conduct a post-incident triage operation. SecOps personnel need to forensically review internal logs and device user lists, specifically looking for any newly created, unauthorized administrator accounts. Applying a patch only closes the door against future bypass attempts. If an attacker has already leveraged the exploit to create a backdoor admin account, your infrastructure remains fully compromised. This situation illustrates exactly why coordinated vulnerability disclosure is a necessary practice. With threat actors already exploiting this flaw at scale to build botnets, asymmetric knowledge sharing is the only way to level the playing field for defenders. Defending the network perimeter against active zero days requires absolute transparency and immediate action. This has been your technical briefing on CVE 2026-34908. Modern network security demands an active, continuous operation.